The ice storm hit Pine Ridge, Georgia in the middle of February with a fury that nobody expected. And when I heard the transformer blow 3 streets over, I knew we were in for a rough couple of days without power. I'm Xavier Stone, and I've lived in the Magnolia Heights subdivision for about 5 years now. It's one of those newer developments where every house looks almost identical, and the HOA rules are thicker than a phone book. My property sits on the edge of the neighborhood, backing up to some woods, and unlike most of my neighbors who are on city water, my house has a well. The previous owner installed it because he wanted to save on water bills, and honestly, I've been grateful for it ever since I moved in. When the power went out that Friday evening, I wasn't too worried. I had my portable generator in the garage, a decent 7,500-watt unit that I'd purchased specifically for situations like this. The thing is, most people don't understand how generators work or what it takes to properly install one. Mine wasn't just sitting there ready to plug into whatever I wanted. 2 years ago, I'd paid an electrician to install a transfer switch and wire the generator directly to my well pump circuit. Just the well pump. Nothing else. The reason was simple. During a power outage, the most critical thing for me was water. I could live without lights, without television, without my microwave. But I needed water to flush toilets, wash hands, and have something to drink. The generator I owned wasn't powerful enough to run my whole house anyway, and the well pump only drew about 1,500 watts. It was a practical solution that made perfect sense. I got the generator running about an hour after the power went out. The temperature was already dropping inside the house, and I could see my neighbors starting to realize this wasn't going to be a quick fix. Ice coated everything outside, and I'd heard on my battery-powered radio that the utility company was saying it could be 3 to 5 days before power was restored to our area. Thousands of people were affected across 3 counties. I bundled up in layers, lit some candles, and settled in with a book. The generator hummed steadily outside, doing its one job of keeping my well pump operational. Every few hours, I'd go out and refill the gas tank from the 5 jerry cans I kept stored in my shed. I'd learned to be prepared after a bad storm 2 years back when I'd gone 4 days without power and had to rely on bottled water and the charity of friends who had city water. Saturday morning came with no change in the power situation. I made myself some coffee using my camping stove and looked outside to see my neighbors wandering around their yards, looking miserable. The temperature had dropped to the low 20s overnight, and most houses in Magnolia Heights were all electric. No power meant no heat, no hot water, no way to cook, and most critically for many people, no water after the first toilet flush depleted their pressure tanks. I was finishing my coffee when I heard the knock on my door. Loud, insistent, the kind of knock that immediately puts you on edge. I opened it to find Brenda Patterson standing on my porch, wrapped in what looked like 3 different coats, her face pinched with cold and annoyance. Brenda was the HOA president, a position she'd held for the past 4 years with an iron fist and a complete lack of common sense. She was in her mid-50s, had that distinctive haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and treated the HOA bylaws like they were holy scripture. We'd tangled before over various ridiculous issues like my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall or my garbage cans being visible from the street for 30 minutes longer than allowed. "Xavier," she said, her tone already accusatory, "I can hear your generator running." "Morning, Brenda," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Yeah, I've got it hooked up to keep my well pump working. Pretty cold out here. You want to come in for a minute to warm up?" She didn't accept the invitation. Instead, She crossed her arms and gave me the look I'd come to recognize as her "I'm about to make your life difficult" expression. Section 7. Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that homeowners must consider the collective good of the community in times of crisis, she said. You have a working generator while the rest of us are suffering without power. I'm here to requisition it for community use. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. You're here to what? Requisition your generator, she repeated, as if saying it again would somehow make it sound less insane. We need to set it up at the community center to charge phones and medical devices. It's for the good of the neighborhood. Brenda, first of all, you can't just requisition someone's personal property. That's not how anything works. Second, my generator is hardwired to my well pump. It's not portable in the sense you're thinking. I can't just unplug it and move it somewhere else. Her eyes narrowed. Don't lie to me, Xavier. I can see the generator sitting right there in your driveway. It's clearly portable. It has wheels. The generator itself is portable, yes, but it's connected to my house's electrical system through a transfer switch. It only powers my well pump circuit. Even if I wanted to help, which I'm not saying I don't, I'd have to disconnect it, which would leave me without water, and it still wouldn't do what you're asking because it's specifically set up for my well pump. I don't care about your technical excuses, Brenda snapped. The HOA has authority in emergency situations. I'm invoking Emergency Provision 12. I'd never heard of Emergency Provision 12, probably because I'd done what any sane person would do and ignored most of the HOA's ridiculous documentation. Even if that were a real thing, I said slowly, you can't just take someone's property. That's called theft. It's not theft if it's for the community good, she insisted. I've already spoken with several board members and we're in agreement. You need to surrender the generator or we'll be forced to take action. What kind of action? I asked, genuinely curious about how far she planned to take this insanity. We can fine you. We can put a lien on your property. We can make your life very difficult, Xavier. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that arguing with Brenda was like arguing with a brick wall, except the brick wall had more capacity for reason. Look, I'm sorry people are struggling. I really am. But my generator is set up specifically for my well pump. It can't be easily moved or repurposed. And even if it could, I have every right to use my own property to maintain my own home's basic functions. We'll see what the HOA board has to say about that, she said, turning on her heel and nearly slipping on the icy porch steps. She caught herself on the railing and shot me a glare as if it were somehow my fault. I closed the door and shook my head. I'd dealt with Brenda's nonsense before, but this was next level. I'd heard stories about HOAs going crazy with power, but attempting to confiscate personal property during an emergency was a new low. The rest of Saturday passed quietly. I could see various neighbors talking in small groups, and I noticed several of them glancing at my house. Word was spreading, apparently. I checked on my generator periodically, making sure it had fuel and was running properly. The well pump kicked on and off as needed when I used water, exactly as designed. Sunday morning brought another knock, but this time it was my neighbor from 2 doors down, Marcus Webb. Marcus was a decent guy, a teacher at the local high school, and we'd helped each other out with various projects over the years. "Hey, Xavier," he said, looking embarrassed. "Listen, Brenda's been going around telling everyone that you're refusing to share your generator with people who need it for medical devices, and that you're violating some HOA emergency provision." "That's not exactly the full story," I said, and explained the situation to him, including the fact that my generator was hardwired specifically for my well pump. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, that makes sense. I figured there was more to it." My wife has been getting texts in the neighborhood group chat and people are getting pretty worked up. Just wanted to give you a heads up." "I appreciate it," I told him. "For what it's worth, if someone genuinely has a medical emergency, they should call 911. The hospital is only 15 minutes away and emergency services are still running." "I know, man." I tried to point that out, but you know how Brenda gets. After Marcus left, I checked my phone. I'd been charging it in my car periodically to save the battery, and I saw I'd been added to the Magnolia Heights neighborhood group chat at some point in the past. There were over 200 messages, many of them about me. Brenda had indeed been busy. According to her messages, I was a selfish hoarder who refused to help my neighbors in their time of need. She'd posted pictures of my generator running, making it sound like I was living in luxury while everyone else suffered. The comments ranged from sympathetic to outright hostile. Several people were defending me, pointing out that everyone had the right to use their own property as they saw fit. Others were saying I should be forced to share. One person, thankfully, pointed out that generators needed to be properly set up and couldn't just be plugged into any random thing. I decided to post a message explaining the technical reality. I kept it simple and factual. My generator was hardwired to my well pump through a transfer switch. It powered only my water system. It could not be easily moved or repurposed. I sympathized with everyone's situation, but I had every right to maintain basic water service in my own home. The response was immediate and mixed. Some people understood and backed off. Others, clearly influenced by Brenda, accused me of making excuses. One person suggested that I should just let people come to my house to get water then, which actually wasn't an unreasonable request. I posted another message saying that anyone who needed water was welcome to come by with containers, and I'd fill them up. I figured that was a reasonable compromise. I had water to spare, and it would actually prove that my generator was really only running my well pump. Brenda's response came within minutes. "That's not good enough. The HOA demands full access to the generator for community purposes. Your refusal to comply will be noted in your file." I didn't bother responding. You can't reason with unreasonable people. Sunday afternoon, people started showing up for water. I'd expected maybe a handful, but it turned into a steady stream. I filled gallon jugs, buckets, pots, and whatever else people brought. Most folks were grateful and understanding when they saw my setup, and realized I wasn't living in some powered paradise, just keeping my water running. One woman, Sarah Chen from down the street, brought her 2 kids and several containers. "Thank you so much," she said. I didn't realize how much we took running water for granted. The kids need to wash up and we've been unable to flush the toilets properly. "No problem," I told her. "Take as much as you need." "I saw what Brenda's been saying in the group chat," Sarah added quietly. "She's way out of line." Everyone knows how she is, though. She tried to fine us last year because our Christmas lights were the wrong shade of white. I laughed despite myself. Sounds about right. As the day wore on, I'd say I probably provided water to about 30 different households. It was actually kind of nice, seeing the community come together in a real way rather than through Brenda's forced HOA events that nobody actually enjoyed. But of course, Brenda wasn't happy about this either. She showed up around 4 in the afternoon, as I was filling containers for an elderly couple from the next street over. "This is a liability issue," she announced loudly. "You're running an unlicensed water distribution operation. The HOA has not approved this activity." The elderly man, whose name was Arthur, turned to her with a frown. "Brenda, the man is helping people. What's wrong with you?" "It's about proper procedures and community safety," Brenda insisted. "What if someone gets sick from the water? What if someone slips and falls on his property? These things need to go through proper channels. The power's out, Brenda, Arthur's wife said. There are no proper channels right now. We're just trying to survive until the power comes back on. Brenda's face turned red. The HOA board will be hearing about all of this. Xavier is operating in violation of multiple bylaws, and now he's created an attractive nuisance on his property. An attractive nuisance is for things like swimming pools that attract children, I pointed out. I don't think water distribution during an emergency qualifies. I'll be the judge of that, Brenda snapped. She pulled out her phone and took several pictures of the people lined up at my house with their water containers. Arthur shook his head. You've got too much time on your hands, Brenda. Always have. After Brenda left, several people apologized to me on her behalf, which was nice but unnecessary. I knew what I was dealing with. I'd signed enough HOA documents when I bought the house to know that HOAs could be petty and vindictive, but I also knew they had limits. They couldn't actually steal my property or prevent me from helping my neighbors. Monday morning arrived with still no power. My generator was chugging along reliably, and I'd gone through most of my stored gas, but I'd planned ahead for that too. I had a gas can in my truck and drove out to one of the few gas stations that had power from their backup generators. The lines were long, but I eventually filled up all my containers. When I got back home, I found Brenda standing in my driveway with two other people I recognized from HOA meetings. One was Janet Morrison, the HOA secretary, and the other was Dale Hughes, the treasurer. They all looked cold and miserable, which might have explained their worse-than-usual attitudes. Xavier Stone, Brenda said formally as I got out of my truck. The HOA board has met in emergency session, and we're here to issue you an official notice. She thrust a piece of paper at me. I took it and skimmed through it. It was full of legal-sounding language that basically said I was being fined $500 per day for violation of community emergency provisions, operating an unapproved generator, running an unlicensed water distribution operation, and creating a public nuisance. This is ridiculous, I said flatly. Half of these violations don't even make sense. Operating an unapproved generator. I don't need HOA approval to run a generator on my own property. Section 12. Paragraph 8 clearly states that any equipment that produces noise in excess of 50 decibels requires HOA approval, Janet said, reading from her own copy of the bylaws. That's for permanent installations and only during normal circumstances, I countered. We're in an emergency situation. Normal rules don't apply. The HOA determines when normal rules apply or don't apply, Brenda said smugly, and we've determined that you are in violation. You have 24 hours to cease operations and surrender the generator to HOA custody for community use, or the fines will continue to accrue. Dale, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Look, Xavier, why don't you just cooperate? People need help. You've got resources. It's the right thing to do. I am helping, I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. I've been giving people water all weekend, but I'm not surrendering my personal property to the HOA. That's not legal and you all know it. We'll see what's legal when we put a lien on your property for unpaid fines, Brenda said. The HOA has full legal authority to enforce its bylaws. The HOA has some authority within reasonable limits, I corrected. You can't just make up rules and take people's stuff. That's not how this works. Brenda smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. You clearly haven't read the bylaws carefully enough. Every homeowner in Magnolia Heights signed an agreement giving the HOA broad powers to maintain community standards and safety. You'll be hearing from our attorney. They left, and I stood there holding the ridiculous notice. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and forget about it, but I knew that dealing with an HOA gone rogue required documentation. I went inside and scanned the document, then sent it to my own lawyer, Greg Sinclair, along with a detailed email explaining the situation. Greg called me back within an hour. "This is insane," he said after I'd filled him in on all the details. "They can't requisition your personal property. They can't fine you for helping your neighbors. And they definitely can't force you to stop using your own generator on your own property during a power outage." "That's what I thought," I said. "But Brenda seems convinced the HOA has unlimited power." "A lot of HOA board members think that," Greg said. "They get a little authority and it goes to their heads. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter explaining that their actions constitute harassment and potentially illegal seizure attempts. I'll cite the relevant case law. That should make them back off. And if it doesn't, then we consider filing a lawsuit for harassment and seeking an injunction. But let's try the letter first. These things usually resolve once someone explains the actual law to them." Greg had the letter drafted and emailed within 2 hours. I printed it out and walked it over to Brenda's house. She answered the door looking annoyed. "This is from my attorney," I said, handing her the letter. "You need to read it carefully. What you're doing isn't legal, and if you continue, there will be consequences." She snatched the letter from my hand. "Are you threatening me? I'm informing you. There's a difference. Call off your crusade, Brenda. I'm not breaking any laws and you can't force me to give you my property." "We'll see about that," she muttered and slammed the door. I walked back home wondering if this was really how I was going to spend a power outage, fighting with my HOA instead of just weathering the storm like a normal person. Tuesday brought a development I didn't expect. I was outside refueling the generator when a police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. My heart sank. Had Brenda really called the cops, the officer who got out was someone I recognized vaguely from around town. His name tag read Officer Martinez. He approached with a neutral expression. "Morning," he said. "Are you Xavier Stone?" "That's me." "What's this about?" "I got a call from a Brenda Patterson claiming you've stolen HOA property and are refusing to return it. She also mentioned something about you operating an illegal water distribution business." "Want to fill me in on what's actually going on?" I almost laughed at the absurdity. "She's lying on both counts. The generator is mine. I bought it, I own it, and it's hardwired to my well pump. As for water distribution, I've been giving away free water to neighbors who need it because, as you can see, we don't have power." Officer Martinez glanced at the generator, then at my house. "So this is your property, your generator on your land, completely. And the HOA president is trying to take it from you. She's claiming some kind of emergency provision gives her the right to requisition it. My lawyer says that's not legal." The officer sighed. "Yeah, I've dealt with HOA disputes before. They can get messy. But to be clear, no HOA has the authority to seize private property. That's not a thing. As for helping your neighbors with water, that's just being a good person as far as I can see. So I'm not in trouble, not even a little bit. I'll have a word with Mrs. Patterson about filing false police reports, though. That actually is something she can get in trouble for." He paused. "Between you and me, I've got family over in the Oakmont subdivision that's also out of power. I get it. These outages are rough. People helping each other is what gets us through." After Officer Martinez left, presumably to go talk to Brenda, I felt a small sense of victory. At least the police weren't going to be a tool in Brenda's vendetta. But Brenda wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Tuesday afternoon, I noticed someone walking around my property taking pictures. When I went out to investigate, I found it was Dale, the HOA treasurer. He was photographing my generator from multiple angles. "What are you doing, Dale?" I called out. He looked startled. "Just documenting the situation for HOA records. You're on my property without permission." "That's called trespassing. The HOA has a right to inspect properties for code violations," he protested. "No, you don't. You have the right to observe visible violations from public property or with permission. You don't have the right to wander around my yard taking pictures." Dale mumbled something and left quickly. I made a note of the incident and sent another email to Greg. Wednesday morning, the power came back on. I'd been running the generator for nearly 5 days straight, and I'd gone through more gas than I'd anticipated, but it had done its job. My well pump had worked flawlessly the entire time, and I'd had water when many of my neighbors hadn't. I shut down the generator and disconnected it properly, then stored it back in my garage. The neighborhood slowly came back to life as people's heat kicked on and appliances started working again. I thought that would be the end of it. The crisis was over, Brenda had failed to take my generator, and life could return to normal. But I'd underestimated just how vindictive she could be. Thursday, I received a formal notice in the mail from the HOA attorney, a firm called Davidson and Associates. The letter demanded payment of $3,500 in fines for various violations during the power outage. It also stated that failure to pay within 30 days would result in a lien being placed on my property. I immediately forwarded it to Greg, who called me back sounding angry. "This is harassment, plain and simple. These fines have no legal basis." "I'm going to respond formally and CC the Bar Association. HOA attorneys can get in trouble for pursuing frivolous actions like this." "Should I be worried about the lien?" I asked. "Only if they're stupid enough to actually try it, which would give us grounds for a much bigger lawsuit." "My guess is their attorney is just doing what the client asked without really thinking it through. Once I point out the legal issues, this should go away." But it didn't go away. Instead, it escalated. The following week, I received another notice, this time directly from Brenda. The HOA was calling an emergency meeting to discuss my violations and potential removal from the community. "They can't remove you from the community," Greg explained when I called him. "You own your property. The worst they can do is fine you, and those fines have to be reasonable and based on actual violations. What they're doing is harassment. I think it's time we go on the offensive." Greg filed a lawsuit on my behalf against the HOA, Brenda personally, and the 2 other board members who had participated in the attempted generator seizure. The suit alleged harassment, defamation for the false statements Brenda had made in the neighborhood group chat and to the police, and sought an injunction preventing the HOA from taking any further action against me related to the generator incident. The lawsuit papers were served right before the emergency HOA meeting. I attended the meeting, which was held in the community center, and brought Greg with me. The room was packed. Apparently, word had spread about the drama, and people wanted to see how it played out. Brenda sat at the front table with Janet and Dale, all 3 of them looking grim. Brenda called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a speech about community values and the importance of following HOA rules. "We have a member who has shown flagrant disregard for our bylaws and for the well-being of his neighbors," she said, not using my name but making it obvious who she meant. "During our recent emergency, this individual hoarded resources and refused to help the community despite having the means to do so." "That's a lie," called out Sarah Chen from the audience. "Xavier gave water to anyone who asked. He helped my family and dozens of others." "He only did that after being pressured," Brenda countered, and he refused to surrender his generator for proper community use. Marcus stood up. Because it was hardwired to his well pump, he couldn't just move it. Why is that so hard to understand? That's his claim, Brenda said dismissively. We have no proof that the generator couldn't have been used for other purposes. Greg stood up then, and his presence commanded attention. He was a tall man with a deep voice and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're right. My name is Greg Sinclair, and I'm Mr. Stone's attorney. I'm here to inform this board and everyone present that the actions taken by Mrs. Patterson and the other board members were not only against HOA regulations, but also illegal under Georgia law. You cannot requisition private property. You cannot fine someone for using their own equipment on their own property, and you absolutely cannot retaliate against someone for refusing to comply with illegal demands. We have every right to enforce our bylaws, Brenda sputtered. You have the right to enforce reasonable bylaws that don't violate state or federal law, Greg corrected. What you don't have is the right to harass my client. As of this morning, you've all been served with a lawsuit. I'd strongly suggest you consult with your attorney before taking any further action. The room erupted in murmurs. Janet and Dale both looked shocked. Brenda's face turned bright red. This is outrageous, she shouted. The HOA has immunity for actions taken in good faith. There's nothing good faith about trying to steal someone's property, Greg said calmly. And if you'd like to continue this discussion, we can do it in court where I'll be happy to present all the evidence of your harassment campaign, including the false police report, the threatening letters, and the messages you posted in the neighborhood group chat. Someone in the audience started clapping, and then more people joined in. It wasn't universal, but it was enough to make it clear that Brenda didn't have the support she thought she had. The meeting fell apart after that. Brenda tried to restore order, but people were standing up and leaving, many of them stopping to talk to me and offer their support. Some apologized for believing Brenda's version of events. Others thanked me again for the water. As I was leaving, Dale caught up with me. He looked exhausted. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Brenda convinced us this was about community safety. I didn't realize how far she was taking it. You should probably get your own lawyer, I advised. Greg's suing all 3 board members personally. His face paled. Oh God. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. The HOA's attorney, after reviewing the situation, advised the board to settle immediately. Apparently, once he saw the actual evidence and realized how badly Brenda had misrepresented things, he wanted nothing to do with defending their actions. Janet and Dale both resigned from the board and issued personal apologies. They agreed to settlements that included written statements acknowledging they'd acted improperly. Brenda, however, refused to back down. She insisted she'd done nothing wrong, and that the HOA had every right to take the actions it had taken. This turned out to be a massive miscalculation on her part. During discovery, Greg subpoenaed all of Brenda's communications related to me and the generator incident. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. She'd sent dozens of messages to other board members and neighbors, not just during the power outage but for months before, complaining about me and looking for ways to deal with the Stone problem. There were messages where she discussed trying to fine me out of the neighborhood. Messages where she encouraged neighbors to file complaints about me for trivial or non-existent issues. And most damningly, messages during the power outage where she explicitly stated her plan to make an example out of me for not respecting her authority. Greg was thrilled. This is textbook harassment, and the fact that she documented it all makes our case incredibly strong. We ended up going to mediation in May, about 3 months after the power outage. Brenda showed up with her own attorney, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. The mediator was a retired judge named Feldman who had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Judge Feldman reviewed the evidence, asked some pointed questions, and then delivered his assessment. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to be very direct with you. You have no case. None. What you do have is clear liability for harassment, defamation, and attempted illegal seizure of property. If this goes to trial, you will lose, and you will likely be ordered to pay significant damages plus Mr. Stone's attorney fees. My strong recommendation is that you settle this matter now." "I was acting in the HOA's best interest," Brenda insisted. "No, you were acting on a personal vendetta," Judge Feldman said bluntly. "I've read your messages, Mrs. Patterson. This wasn't about the generator or the community. This was about you not getting your way and trying to punish someone for it." Her attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. She shook her head stubbornly. He whispered more urgently. Finally, she slumped in her chair. "What are the settlement terms?" her attorney asked, sounding defeated. Greg laid them out. Brenda would pay $50,000 in damages, issue a written apology to be posted in the neighborhood group chat and sent to every homeowner, resign from the HOA board, and agree not to run for any HOA position for at least 5 years. The HOA itself would pay my attorney fees and formally rescind all fines and violations. $50,000, Brenda gasped. "That's absurd." "That's actually quite reasonable given the strength of our case," Judge Feldman said. "You're getting off easy, Mrs. Patterson. Take the deal." She took the deal. She didn't have much choice. The formal apology went out the following week. Brenda's letter was brief and clearly written by her attorney, acknowledging that she had acted improperly and that I had done nothing wrong. She resigned from the board effective immediately. The neighborhood reaction was mixed but mostly positive. Most people were just glad the drama was over. A few die-hard Brenda supporters grumbled about me being litigious, but they were in the minority. A new HOA board was elected in June. The new president was Marcus, who ran on a platform of common sense and reasonable enforcement of only the most essential rules. One of his first acts was to formally thank me for helping neighbors during the power outage and to establish an actual emergency protocol that respected individual property rights. As for me, I took the settlement money and did something I'd been considering anyway. I upgraded my generator setup to include a larger battery backup system and solar panels. Now, I wouldn't need to run the noisy generator at all during future outages, at least not for basic needs like the well pump. I also installed a spigot on the outside of my house connected directly to the well, making it easier to share water with neighbors if needed. Marcus, when he saw it, laughed and said, "Only you would respond to HOA harassment by making it even easier to help people." Seemed like the right thing to do, I told him. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, HOAs can absolutely abuse their power if left unchecked, and it's important to stand up to that abuse. Second, documentation is everything. Greg's case was strong because we had evidence of every single thing Brenda had done. Third, most people are reasonable and will do the right thing when given accurate information. The only reason Brenda got as far as she did was because she'd controlled the narrative initially. On a Friday evening in late August, I was sitting on my back porch enjoying the weather when Sarah Chen walked over with her kids. They were carrying a plate of cookies. "We wanted to say thank you again," Sarah said. "I know it's been months, but I was thinking about that power outage and how scary it was, especially with the kids. You really helped us." "It was nothing," I said, accepting the cookies. "Just being a neighbor." "It wasn't nothing," she insisted. "And I'm glad you stood up to Brenda." She needed to be put in her place. The new board is so much better. After they left, I sat there watching the sunset and thinking about how strange the whole situation had been. All of that conflict and drama because someone couldn't accept that they didn't have the right to take what wasn't theirs. My generator sat quietly in the garage, ready for the next emergency. The transfer switch was exactly where it had always been, wired to my well pump and nothing else. That had been the whole point that Brenda never understood or never wanted to understand. The generator wasn't running my whole house. It wasn't providing me with comfort or luxury. It was doing one job, providing water, which is a basic human need. If Brenda had approached me reasonably from the start and asked if there was any way I could help the community, we could have worked something out. I could have offered water sharing immediately instead of waiting for people to ask. I might have even been able to set up a rotation where people could come charge their phones using the power from my well pump circuit during the brief periods when the pump wasn't running. But she didn't want cooperation. She wanted compliance. She wanted to flex her authority and force me to bend to her will. And when I didn't, she escalated and escalated until she'd broken multiple laws and destroyed her own position in the community. The sad thing was that Brenda probably still thought she'd been in the right. Some people are so convinced of their own authority that they can't see when they've crossed the line from leadership to tyranny. I finished the cookies, which were excellent, and went inside. The lights worked perfectly. The water ran when I turned on the tap. Everything was normal and peaceful. That October, we had another brief power outage during a thunderstorm. It only lasted about 6 hours, but I noticed something interesting. Several of my neighbors had bought their own generators. Marcus had one. Sarah's family had one. Even old Arthur down the street had gotten a small unit to keep his refrigerator running. When the power came back on, Marcus joked that we'd become the most generator-dense subdivision in Georgia. Brenda would have hated this, I said. All these unapproved generators making noise. Good thing she's not in charge anymore, Marcus replied. Though I heard she's been going to town council meetings trying to get involved in local politics. God help us all. We both laughed, but I felt a twinge of concern for whatever organization Brenda latched onto next. Some people never learn. As for the HOA, under Marcus's leadership, it actually became functional. The rules were streamlined to focus on things that genuinely affected property values and safety. The arbitrary nonsense was eliminated. People started attending meetings without dread. It was almost like a homeowners association could work when run by reasonable people. Imagine that. I never did have another significant run-in with the HOA. Oh, they sent me a notice once about my mailbox needing a fresh coat of paint, which was fair enough since it actually did look shabby. But the notice was polite, gave me a reasonable time frame, and didn't threaten fines or liens. I painted the mailbox the following weekend. The transfer switch in my garage remained exactly as the electrician had installed it years ago. A simple mechanical device that let me power my well pump during outages. No drama, no complexity, just basic preparedness. Sometimes I'd run into former Brenda supporters around the neighborhood, and the interactions were awkward. Most people just pretended nothing had happened. A few eventually apologized, admitting they'd gotten caught up in the moment without really thinking through what was being asked of me. One guy, Tom Ferris, actually became a pretty good friend after he apologized. He'd been one of the more vocal critics during the outage, but he later admitted he'd been panicking about his family's situation and had let Brenda manipulate him. I was scared and cold and looking for someone to blame, Tom said over beers one evening at a neighborhood cookout. Brenda made it sound like you were living in luxury while we all suffered. Once I actually thought about it and understood your setup, I realized how dumb I'd been. Water under the bridge, I told him, and meant it. People make mistakes, especially in stressful situations. The important thing was learning from them. Life in Magnolia Heights settled into a comfortable routine. The HOA functioned as it should, handling genuine issues without overreach. Neighbors helped each other out without needing to be forced or threatened. And I maintained my generator and transfer switch, knowing that the next power outage wouldn't bring drama, just a quiet hum as my well pump got the power it needed. Every so often, I'd think about that week in February when everything went crazy. About Brenda standing on my porch demanding I hand over my property. About the threats and the fines and the lawsuit that followed. It seemed almost surreal in retrospect, like something that couldn't have actually happened. But it did happen, and it served as a reminder that homeowners associations, like any organization, are only as good as the people running them. Give someone a little power and no oversight, and you might be surprised how quickly reasonable rules become unreasonable demands. The settlement money, after attorney fees, ended up being enough to fully fund my solar and battery backup system. So in a weird way, Brenda's harassment ended up making my house more resilient and energy independent. I doubt that was the outcome she'd envisioned. Greg occasionally checked in, mostly just to chat since we'd become friendly through the whole ordeal. He told me stories about other HOA cases he'd handled, and mine wasn't even close to the craziest. Apparently, HOAs trying to control what color people painted their front doors or what type of flowers they planted was just the tip of the iceberg. I had one case where an HOA tried to ban children from playing outside because they were too noisy, Greg said. Another where they tried to enforce a rule about what breed of dogs people could own. The power trips are real. Makes me wonder why anyone agrees to join an HOA, I said. Sometimes you don't have a choice if you want to buy in certain areas, Greg explained. The key is making sure the bylaws are reasonable and the board has proper oversight. Most HOAs are fine. It's just the crazy ones that make the news. Marcus proved to be an excellent HOA president. He served 2 terms before stepping down to spend more time with his family, and the people who came after him maintained the same reasonable approach. Magnolia Heights became known in the area as one of the better managed subdivisions, which probably helped property values more than any of Brenda's strict enforcement ever did. I sometimes wondered what happened to Brenda after she resigned. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to a different subdivision about a year after the settlement. Maybe she'd learned her lesson, though I doubted it. People like that rarely change. The generator incident became something of a legend in the neighborhood. New residents would hear the story and look at me with a mix of amusement and respect. I'd become the generator guy who stood up to the crazy HOA president. I didn't mind the reputation. Better to be known for standing your ground than for being a pushover. Years passed as they do. The memory of that cold February week faded into just another story, though I never forgot the lessons. Stay prepared. Stand up for your rights. Document everything. And maybe most importantly, don't let anyone bully you into surrendering your property, just because they've convinced themselves they have the authority to demand it. My well pump continued to work perfectly, powered by the grid during normal times and by my generator or battery backup during outages. The transfer switch remained a simple mechanical device that did exactly what it was designed to do, no more and no less. And whenever I heard about HOA drama in other neighborhoods, I'd shake my head and feel grateful that we'd sorted out our issues and moved on to a better system. Because at the end of the day, that's what communities are supposed to do. Work together, respect individual rights, and help each other out when times get tough. Not demand generators that they have no right to take and then throw tantrums when they don't get their way. That Friday evening in August, sitting on my porch with Sarah's cookies and watching the sunset, I realized I'd ended up exactly where I wanted to be. In a home I owned, in a neighborhood that functioned well, with neighbors who looked out for each other, and with the knowledge that I could handle whatever emergencies came my way. All because I'd refused to back down when someone tried to abuse their power. The generator in my garage stood ready, properly maintained and tested regularly. The well pump it was wired to would continue providing water whenever needed, and if another ice storm knocked out power for days, I'd be prepared. And this time, I'd probably start offering water to neighbors right away instead of waiting for them to ask. Not because anyone could force me to, but because that's what good neighbors do, just not to Brenda wherever she was. Some lessons need to stick.